Welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Priscillia Charles, and I'm joined in studio today by Frank Hannigan. Frank is a partner at Strategy Crowd, a soft venture capital fund. You're very welcome, Frank. Thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here.
So let's get on to the show. Frank, I'd like you to give us and our audience an overview of your current roles. And you're involved in a lot of different roles and a lot of different activities. It's really interesting. So can you kind of take us through, your roles and all the different areas that you're involved in?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing is there any way to bring them all together? And I think the easiest way is to describe it as my life is working with leaders of SMEs to create transformational growth. Mm-hmm. And so I do that in very many different ways. The one way is as non-exec director, where I bring external perspective to successful companies. And I'm on the board of a number of organizations, including RTE, which is the national broadcaster. The second thing is I work through global platforms. So with the World Bank, I help them invest in innovative companies in Serbia and also in a different fund in Georgia. And then with the European Bank, I am responsible for a advisory practice that focuses on creative industries. So that's film, media, architecture,
wow.
You name it. So that's kind of cool. And that gets me out of the country as well as in the country. So I'm just back from Armenia, wow. which is the first kingdom in the world to become Christian. And I work in Tajikistan, Tunisia, Jordan, Ukraine. I've worked in the past in places like Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. So
fantastic.
It's great for perspective.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Wow. Okay. So now I'd like you to get back to the start, if I may say, and take us through your studies. So you hold a bachelor's degree in economics and
yes.
social studies from Trinity College Dublin. Yeah. So what made you choose this particular field in the first place?
I thought I would meet a lot of attractive women and get access to very inexpensive beer. So they were the two biggies. I didn't really have a clear idea, and I think it's incredibly difficult for somebody who's 18 years of age to have this clear path.
Yeah, this clear vision of what they want to do. Yeah,
it's somebody.
Absolutely.
There was one of the modern writers said the most unfair thing to do is to tell young people to follow their passions, because most people don't have a passion.
They don't know yet.
And so I think for me, I did a degree which was kind of very general. It was a business degree. I thought Trinity was a great place. It sounded very cool as somebody who was 17 or 18 years of age, and it is a great college. And so I was very proud to be there and be from Trinity. I did mostly I focused on the beer and the women, but I did a certain amount of study and got through, and it was a great start in life.
Sounds like it. And now I'd like to talk about your current role at Strategy Crowd. You're one of 4 partners in Strategy Crowd, a soft venture capital fund that applies its skills and resources to help clients grow their businesses. So can you tell us a bit about your role more in depth and about the company?
Yeah, Strategy Crowd was something that came about myself and there were 3 other guys who respected each other, enjoyed each other's company. And the question we asked ourselves was, if we came together, would we get cooler, more exciting work? And would we get more kind of certainty about the flow of work? And that was the real foundation of Strategy Crowd. So the idea would be that 4 very experienced business leaders who wanted to commit themselves to business advisory as a career, and we have different personalities. We'd support each other and we'd mentor each other to be better at what we did, mm-hmm. and to work together to win business. And that's really how we came together. We started off tendering for platform work from people like Enterprise Ireland. We've now started to work with private equity partners, mm-hmm. looking at structuring deals that will transform companies over 5 to 7 years.
Yes.
So that's been our journey to date, and we're still on the journey. We're still making it up, which is, I think, perfectly fine.
Absolutely. I understand that you focus on a certain number of criteria to help a few companies.
Yeah. So
how does that work? Is this like a certain number of companies every year, or
we touch directly and through platforms about 300 to 500 companies a year between both the 4 partners. We also have we have associates, 20 associates, who basically give us breadth and allow us to go after bigger projects. And what we focus on is, I suppose what we don't do is important. We don't do HR, we don't do finance. We focus on strategy, on innovation, and on sales and marketing approach. And that's really, so we have no huge interest in cutting costs. What we're fascinated about is how we can allow senior leadership and SMEs to imagine themselves growing and to transform themselves to the next level. And I think it's very hard when you're running an SME to have the perspective and to have the clarity of thought to have a really powerful ambition for your company. So we come in and hopefully we help the leaders to do that.
I'm sure you do. That's great. So now I understand that strategy partners have deep knowledge of specific vertical markets. Some of them include creative industries, life sciences, information technology, financial services, as we discussed, in agriculture and food. So like all those industries are being impacted by new technology, such as artificial intelligence, and they're all changing, with economic factors. So are there any common threads, in your opinion, that you see when working with these companies and in these industries?
I was on a panel last night in UCC and we talked about this, and we talked about how can business advisors continue to be relevant given the pace of IT change and the pace of change in the labour market, for example. And I think the words we used were that both for the business advisor and for the SMEs, personal integrity and personal resilience are really the important things. So each, if I think back, I was involved at the very start of the internet. Things have changed so profoundly since even then. But in reality, the advice that we provide, the perspective we provide remains constant. So our ability to understand change is more important than the change itself.
Yes.
So AI, I would say, for example, we had a great conversation last night about data science and about companies becoming closer to their customers. But in fact, in many companies, data science is used to preclude them from facing up to the reality of their customers.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you're a customer of Ryanair, they've got great data science. They know how to squeeze your profitability. But until quite recently, they didn't have any sense of humanity, and so the experience was often awful, even though on paper it looked as if it was very profitable. So one of the conversations last night is how anthropology, understanding humanity, is going to be so much more powerful than simply understanding data.
Absolutely.
So I think that the ability for a business advisor to have a broad sense of the purpose and the impact companies have on their customers, that's really what we get paid for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure they're very helpful, and it is very helpful to them. So now talking about those challenges, really, how would you expand on some of the key challenges that those organizations are facing? So you talk about how some challenges need to focus more on the human aspect of it. Or so what have you seen throughout your career? Is there any particular challenge that you would be able to help with?
There's a Nobel laureate talks about the global supply chains being atomized, and the reason they're large companies are failing, and the successful companies in the future, he believes, will tend to be SMEs, is about one word, which is purpose. So there was a guy on the stage last night. He graduated from his master's in 2018. He's working at Google. Yeah. And you could hear the fire in his voice. He believed he was working for a company that could provide him with great purpose personally. And money was just not enough. So in a constrained labour market, you can see it more clearly. But I think in general, people want the companies they work for to have great purpose. And what this Nobel laureate spoke about was the failure of companies to compete unless they were built on passion, which meant you couldn't do a million things. You can't be passionate about producing a Volkswagen car. When I was a kid, Wolfsburg was a huge company that produced cars. Now, if you look at a company like Volkswagen or Daimler-Benz, they're relatively small companies with thousands of companies in their supply chain. Each of those companies is passionate about one part of the process of producing a car. And I think that's, it defines Mittelstand in Germany. I think it's a new lens look at companies. So big is not beautiful. Passionate is beautiful. Absolutely, and that's the future.
That's the key, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. So now we're talking about Dublin. We're talking about some companies. When talking about Dublin, we often think that it's become Silicon Valley of Europe, really. And in your opinion, how would you say how influential is the role that Dublin and Ireland plays on the international scale?
Well, the first thing, going back to what I was just saying, is I don't think Silicon Valley is a model for Ireland. It's not our soul, and it's not something we have the ingredients to make. Silicon Valley has erupted because of a number of very specific things: access to capital, fourth, fifth generational capital. That's not something we have access to, and I don't think we're going to produce our own Facebooks. In fact, I think Facebook and Amazon and Netflix are outliers in terms of the future of business. So what I described, I believe the future of Dublin will be a place where it attracts talent and capital, but primarily it creates companies that are SMEs. And because of the fact that we're an island nation, we naturally look outwards. And I think those SMEs will become part of many global supply chains. And our future is, if you like, more resilient, because we're not trying to be Silicon Valley. We are trying to be an Irish version of Mittelstand in Germany, which is much more powerful. And I'm much more excited about that than I am about the Silicon Docs are great. I'm excited about the companies that supply Facebook and supply Google and have emerged from the minds of Irish people and Polish people and Indian people who arrived in Dublin. So I think Dublin is now it's one of those cities. It's a world city that has its own atmosphere that draws in talent and projects and money.
Yes.
So it's great. It's great to be here.
It is an exciting time, an exciting place to be. Absolutely. So now I'd like to talk about your background. You have a background in sales initially, from what I understand. So that must certainly help you a lot in the venture capital investment business industry.
Well, I think everybody sells. Like, that's the thing. If you're the Pope, you're selling. If you're the cleaner, you're selling. So I think understanding that language and, if you like, understanding the capacity to create narrative, I think, is important for business in general. The one thing I would say is venture capital in Ireland is really quite modest. What I would, over the last couple of years, one of the interesting things I've seen is the emergence of debt as a weapon for SMEs to start growing. So I interviewed a guy who was doing kind of premium debt for SMEs, and I said, how much are you charging? 7.5% to 8% on debt over 5 years. So that seems expensive. And he goes, compared to what? I said, well, compared to the pillar banks. Yeah. And he said, I'm not competing with the pillar banks. I'm competing with venture capital. Venture capital provides you with the money to solve a short-term problem. Yes. And holds on to your asset class in the long term. On the other hand, I'll give you 5 or 6 million euros to fund your growth. Yeah, and once you pay me back, I'm gone. And I thought that was quite interesting. So I think venture capital it has not developed in Ireland as well as it has, for example, on the east or west coast of the States. And I think the nature of financial services, the disruption is so profound and so comprehensive that now we have equity and we have debt and we have mixtures of the two. So it's never been a better time to be funded as an entrepreneur. And for people like Strategy Crowd, we have a tremendous number of good potential partners that can allow us to play in this space. Absolutely. So, okay. And talking about all this investment potential, how would you see the investment industry, if I may say, the landscape changing? Because you're saying basically this is the right time, this is the perfect opportunity. So how would you see this in the future? I think we're in Ireland. We have produced very few world-class economists, but we produced one guy, Cantillon, who actually created the word entrepreneur as we understand it. He was born in Kerry. He made his money in Paris. He was one of the original investors in the Mississippi Company, and he, as well as coming up with a lot of the theoretical framework for how money works and using the word entrepreneur as we use it in modern life, he also had this fantastic statement, which was, the purpose of a business is to create value, not to amass money. And it's a profound statement of intent. I think the investment industry too often has been focused on return and on financial outcomes. I think there are some really smart people now who recognise that this is a life that has meaning as well. So if they have the ambition, and if they can find the deal flow, they can change Ireland. They can do much more than make a return for their investors.
Yes.
And that's, like every other sector, I think this move from money to purpose is happening. And I'm delighted to say in Ireland, there are real professionals in the investment community that have that kind of scale of ambition. They're not simply accountants doling out cash and hoping to get 1 in 10 of the deals to succeed. They're driven by passion, which is great.
That's actually that's all you want, really. So now, talking about your some of your other activities, for the past 10 years, you've been a mentor and guest lecturer in various third-level educational institutes. Some of them include the Dublin City University, Limerick Institute of Technology, and Cork Institute of Technology. And as a mentor and guest lecturer, you've been advising individual companies to develop their international businesses. So how important would you say is the role of a mentor for those companies looking to go global?
Well, I think everybody needs a mentor. So, mentor was a real historical person. He looked after a king's son when the king went off to battle. And the king said, look after him, train him for life, be a father to him, be a brother to him. And I think when you consider that the role of the mentor goes back as far as ancient Greece, you get a sense that it has a lot of context.
Absolutely.
So I need a mentor because I lack perspective in terms of my own ambition, and I need somebody who's able to say, you're taking drugs, stop it. You've lost perspective on your ambition. So I think providing mentorship to young people is a very valid way to spend your time. I think even very successful business people just need somebody to second guess them, or help them ask the hard questions that allow them to polish the diamond of their ambition.
Yeah, put themselves into perspective. Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think we all do. And talking about mentoring companies, what advice would you give to those organizations who actually want to effectively develop their brands globally?
Well, one of the interesting things from all the travel I've done is how alike we all are. So globalization, when I was a kid, seemed like a very bad thing, and it seemed kind of almost ill-informed, because I imagine that there were so many differences between us. Working in places like Mongolia, you suddenly realize that 95% of what it is to be human is shared globally. There's a thin veneer which is about your personality, your family, your culture, and that's very rich. And to engage in international markets, you do need to invest to understand that.
Absolutely.
But below that thin veneer, we're all the same. We have the same insecurities, the same hopes, and I think I would hope that Irish companies especially would view their ambition in a global context, and they have every right to. When I was young, Ireland was small, America was big, globalization was only for huge corporations. If you buy into the narrative of the atomization of global supply chains, if you buy into the narrative that we're all pretty much the same, and then that thin veneer needs to be learned, there's no reason why Irish companies can't be global. And I think global, not necessarily Facebook. So it could be a company with 100 employees in Sandyford that enriches 10 global supply chains, and they're part of a profundity or a profound way of engaging the customers, but they're just one small part of it.
Yeah.
And that'll be that's the way I see Irish companies becoming global.
Absolutely, yes. And talking about the global scale, so you're also an RT board member, and you also engage with the Institute Management Consultant and Advisors, plus the Innovation Fund in Serbia. So that sounds very busy. You mentioned those in the beginning. Yeah. Can you expand a little bit on those positions?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing is they all kind of consolidate into this, if you like, the role of helping leaders to create transformational growth. So I think my role on RTE's board, we have fabulous people who understand culture in a much more detailed and rich way than I do. I suppose my role is to look at how the organization can perform commercially. And so I have, one of my big projects was to ensure that the archives are properly financed. And this board's ambition is that the archives will be fully digitized and available free to any Irish person, wherever they live in the world, to be able to explore their sense of Irishness.
Fantastic, yeah.
So, I think while the work is done by the management team, I think advisors and board members can help frame the ambition and support the leadership teams to do transformation. I think incremental growth is cool. That's stuff that accountants do. I think people like Strategy Crowd, people like me, are interested in the transformation, the huge growth and the huge change, as opposed to
larger scale,
transactional movements in size. So that's the stuff I love. RTE, incredibly powerful, incredibly valuable to Ireland. It reflects the country, and I think if it ever died, it would be like the BBC. It would leave our culture bereft of many important kind of strengths. So.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thanks very much. And talking about we're talking about technologies earlier on and the role of Ireland. So, given your extensive experience, do you see any trends or disruptive technologies that that on the horizon in the next few years?
Well, I'm going to say something kind of that's not going to fit with the question. I actually think the consumer is disrupting, and when I was a kid, the feeling was sales process was pretty much in the hands of the person selling. McKinsey have done a very good research piece that says that pretty much 80% of the sales process is now controlled by the consumer.
Yes,
they do. Pre-purchase research. That research decides if your company is going to be shortlisted, and if you're not shortlisted, you're not going to get the deal. So that kind of has changed everything. I think, for example, I talked recently about food. I don't think food will be decided by Nestle or the big corporations. I think consumers in Western mature economies are walking away from processed food.
Yes.
And I think that the future will be largely smaller SME food producers who are focused on quality and taste and being genuine. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I'm absolutely guaranteeing you that Nestle buying these small companies is not a strategy that's going to win. I think you probably need to actually be really humble and get beyond the data science and actually talk to the customer about what they want. And I think Nestle, not picking on Nestle.
Yes.
I think it's because you're in front of me, I'm thinking of Nestle. But I think their traditional mode of change, the incremental change, is not going to work for them. They need to
big corporations
almost reinvent themselves in a way that reflects the power that the customer has now. And the same goes for cars. I think people are not, in America, people have walked away from gas guzzlers.
Yes.
That wasn't...
Habits are changing for sure. Yeah,
yeah, but you can see that changed from the consumer side. It wasn't because GE or Ford said, whoa, we want to make a more sustainable planet. It's because customers said, no more.
No more, yes. Absolutely, yes. No, that totally makes sense. And would you have any advice for our listeners that are already operating in a number of different countries, speaking of the global scale, languages and cultures, and also any advice that you'd give to an organization who's looking to expand to those new markets, international markets? I think
the first thing is be brave. I think believe that you can do it. I think the second thing is invest time to understand the countries you're going for, and perhaps some companies have a naive view of how difficult it is to open a new marketplace. So working with DIT on the international sales program, often our job is to rein in SMEs and say, your plan to enter 17 markets is so brave, so ambitious, but it means you're only giving
risky.
a 17th of your time
Yes.
to each of these markets. Why not win Westphalia, and once you've done that, take on the next part of Germany, and eventually go for France. So I think focus is incredibly important. Being realistic about what it is to run a company. Running a company is desperately simple. You're managing three things. You're managing time, scarce resources, and your ability to consume risk. So if you understand that all those things are constrained, you need to then focus on what's the most you can achieve with what you got as a set of ingredients.
Yes. Great, fantastic. Thanks very much. And finally, is there any other project that you'd be working on that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Well,
that's a tough question because you're involved in so many.
Yeah, I mean, what I can tell you is, there are some really cool things. I'm not going to tell you about them because they're all kind of crazy and muddled up my head right now. But what I can tell you is, we're at the start of the year. Every year, I try and retire some of the work I do. So every year, my ambition is to remove from my workflow work where I'm not adding huge value and replace with higher value stuff. And that's pretty much from lean, Kaizen, continuous improvement. So I'm always thinking about one thing, and that is, how can I, with the ingredients I have to offer, how can I have more impact than I had last year?
Yes.
And what should I be researching this year for 10 years time? And that's how I live my life. So I always have new projects. I'm always crazy
That's
ambitious.
A good motto. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Frank. It was lovely to have you today on the show, and so interesting. Such good tips, advice, if I may say. Sorry. So that's the end of today's show with Frank Hannigan, partner at Strategy Crown, the soft venture capital fund. Please make sure to tune in for our next VistaTalks show with more interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world.